years ago, I did this little PowerPoint presentation on some famous LGBTQ plus etc. historical figures. And I just felt I might as well record it and put it on here. Because, everyone comes to YouTube to watch PowerPoints, right? Anyway, some of these people I have talked about on here before, but there are also going to be some newbies. And without further ado, let's go. I am going chronologically, so first up we have Achilles, or Achilles if you want to sound pretentious. He is mythological, but if he did exist, he would have lived somewhere around 1300 to 1100 BCE. So he was a demigod and is best known for his role during the Trojan War, where he was the greatest Greek warrior up until he was killed by an arrow guided by the god Apollo. But the real question we have to ask is, were he and Patroclus lovers? The short answer is yes. The longer answer, it depends on the source. There was a lot of debate. In the classical period, the lovers' argument had Plato, Achilles, Aeschines, Pindar, Plutarch, Lucian, etc. And the friends' argument had Xenophon. As for the original text, the Trojan cycle consists of 8 books. The Iliad and the Odyssey are the oldest and the only that survive. Based on the Iliad, I would say it's not explicit, but you see what you want to see. So personally, I see it as romantic, but not everyone agrees with me. The reason I chose to include him is not just because I love the Trojan War, since I was a child. It's because of the influence he had, especially on gay men throughout history. Like, even the Greeks were into him. Alexander the Great idolized him. In Leonardo, Mehmed II idolized both Achilles and Alexander. Shakespeare included him in a play. And even when it's not directly about him, there are lots of people who were obsessed with Greek culture, like Hadrian and Anne Lister and Oscar Wilde. Speaking of Greek culture, Sappho. Sappho was a lyric poet. Plato named her the 10th muse, and she was also called the poetess as a parallel to Homer, who was referred to as the poet. There's not much known about her. She's from the island of Lesbos, which of course is where we got the word lesbian. She was born to a powerful family and probably had 3 brothers. Later in her life, her family was exiled. That's basically it. She may have had a daughter, but the word used to describe Claes translates as both child and younger homosexual lover. So that tells us nothing. You also sometimes hear about her husband, but the first reference to him came centuries after her death and named him Kyklas of Andros, which basically means small dick of Man Island. So many historians believe that was just a joke. The important part of her life is her poetry, which is mostly lost. It is believed she wrote over 10,000 lines of poetry, but only 650 lines survive today, mostly in fragments. Many are just single lines or even just a word or two. For example, fragment 179, which is a single word that just translates as makeup bag. A few are longer, and the longest is Ode to Aphrodite, or fragment 1. What makes this poem most interesting is that it explicitly identifies Sappho as the speaker, and also specifies a female object of desire. Poetry isn't always autobiographical, but using her own name suggests this poem is. Alexander the Great. He conquered most of the known world, from Greece to India, and he is the main reason I mentioned Achilles, because he was a huge fanboy. People, including himself, compared him to Achilles. It is said he slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow, which might not be true because at the time the Iliad was typically kept as a set of 24 scrolls, which would not have fit under a pillow. But it's possible he carried it with him anyways. Either way, he did take Homer all the way to India. But if we are talking about Alexander, we have to mention his best friend. He met Bucephalus when they were both about 10, and they immediately became inseparable, and he was a horse. The story of their meeting is ridiculous. Some guys were trying to sell horses to Alexander's father, Philip II. They brought up Bucephalus, who was huge and untrained and completely uncontrollable. Philip didn't want him, but Alexander did and asked his father if he would buy the horse, if Alexander could control him. All of Philip's advisors were like, "Sir, don't do it, that horse is going to kill him," but Philip said, "Sure, go for it, kid." And to everyone's surprise, Alexander went out and immediately calmed the horse and named him. When Bucephalus tragically died at around age 30, Alexander named the city Bucephala in his honor. But I'm sure you actually want to know about Hephaestion, his companion and assumed lover. The Cynic philosophers later said Alexander was only defeated once, and that was by Hephaestion's thighs. They were childhood friends, and they studied together under Aristotle, who described them as one soul abiding in two bodies. Hephaestion was very much the Patroclus to Alexander's Achilles. When they visited Troy, they went to the graves of Achilles and Patroclus. Alexander laid a wreath on the gravestone of Achilles, and Hephaestion laid one on Patroclus's. And then they had a naked race, because ancient Greece. Just a reminder, at this time, most Greeks believed Achilles and Patroclus were lovers, so it's very likely Alexander knew this when he made the comparison. When Hephaestion died, Alexander again copied Achilles by ripping out his hair. He had Hephaestion worshipped as a divine hero, because the oracle wouldn't let him be a god. He spent approximately $200 million of today's money in mourning Hephaestion, and was still planning more memorials when he died 8 months later, just shy of his 33rd birthday. His empire was destroyed after his death because he had no living heir. Warning, I am trying my best at these pronunciations, and I deeply apologize for how terrible they're going to sound. Hopefully I'm at least somewhat close. Emperor Ai of Han was a Chinese emperor of the Han Dynasty. As a prince, he was considered very intelligent and reasonable. People had high hopes for his rule. He became emperor at age 20, and it started well. He decreased spending and reduced the influence of the Wang clan. But that quickly ended, and his rule ended up being full of corruption and high taxes. A major issue was the control his grandmother had on him. Consort Fu convinced Ai to give her the title of Grand Dowager Empress, which she didn't technically deserve because she had never been empress. He also gave titles to many of her relatives. One example of Grand Dowager Empress Fu misusing her power, a doctor falsely accused Princess Dowager Feng of witchcraft. Grand Dowager Empress Fu hated Feng and used this as an opportunity to ruin her. She sent an eunuch to investigate and torture Princess Feng's relatives. When that failed, they forced her to commit suicide. Emperor Ai is well known for his relationship with Dong Shan. Dong Shan was a minor official and probably Ai's lover. Members of the court didn't approve of this relationship. Nobody cared that they were gay. It was actually somewhat common. The problem was Ai kept promoting Dong well above his abilities. When Prime Minister Wang Jia opposed these promotions, he was executed. By 2 BCE, Dong was the commander of the armed forces and the most important court official. The next year, Ai died and Dong was forced to commit suicide. But what Ai and Dong are best known for today is the passion of the cut sleeve. One day they took a nap and Dong fell asleep on Ai's sleeve. When Ai awoke, rather than disturb his lover, he cut his sleeve so Dong could continue to sleep. Cut sleeve became a euphemism for homosexuality and even inspired a story in the 18th century, over 1700 years after their deaths. So now we're going to skip over the so-called Dark Ages and jump forward over 1400 years. Mehmed II, aka Mehmed the Conqueror, or Fatih Sultan Mehmed, was an Ottoman sultan best known for conquering Constantinople as well as areas in Anatolia and the Balkans. Quick note, of course now the city is called Istanbul, but at the time Constantinople was the more accepted term around the world. But really, the name is complicated. I'm just going to be using Constantinople. He was the fourth son of Murad II. His mother was a slave named Huma Hatun. When he was just 12, his father abdicated and made Mehmed sultan. This did not go well, and long story short, his father had to come back and lead the army against crusaders from other countries. His father kept the throne until his death in 1451, making the now 19-year-old Mehmed Sultan again. One of his first moves as Sultan was to take Constantinople, which at that point was the capital of the Byzantine Empire, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire, and ruled by Constantine XI. This was a huge feat. Constantinople was a walled city in the perfect location to resist attack. But he succeeded. On May 29, 1453, the 21-year-old Mehmed brought down the Byzantine Empire. He made Constantinople the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, which it remained until the end of the empire in 1923. He also took the title Caesar because he had defeated the Eastern Roman Empire. He spent the rest of his rule conquering more land, rebuilding Constantinople, and centralizing the government, as well as patronizing artists, building a library, and building 8 colleges. As with other sultans, he had several wives, and he had several children with them, unlike his hero, Alexander the Great. It's also said he kept a harem of beautiful young men in his seraglio, including Radu the Fair, also known as Radu the Handsome. Actually, when he first approached Radu, Radu was not into it and ended up stabbing Mehmed and hiding a tree until Mehmed promised not to hurt him. Evidently, they got over it because Radu ended up becoming an important part of Mehmed's court and Mehmed's favorite. Radu was a prince of Wallachia. As a child, his father had given Radu and his older brother Vlad to the Ottomans as hostages. Vlad was released to take over Wallachia after their father's death. That made him Vlad III Dracula, as in the inspiration for that Dracula. Anyway, Dracula was not a big fan of the Ottomans. His family was allowed to rule their lands as long as they paid tribute, and he wouldn't pay. He actually impaled the Ottomans who came to collect. That's how he earned his nickname Vlad the Impaler. Mehmed really did not take this well. He invaded, drove Dracula out of Wallachia, and placed his boyfriend Radu on the throne, making him Radu III of Wallachia. By the way, the stuff about the harem may have been made up by people who hated the Ottomans, but I think it's still a cool story, so I'm keeping it in here. Some of you might know I'm slightly obsessed with Leonardo da Vinci, but I will try to keep this short. He's best known for his paintings, but he did all the jobs. Engineer, scientist, musician, theorist, architect, stage designer, and so on. The ultimate Renaissance man. Not bad for a bastard son of a notary and a peasant. He learned reading, writing, and arithmetic at school, but didn't reach the level of Greek or Latin, which basically meant he was considered uneducated or unlettered. He was actually kind of proud of this. He instead claimed he studied at the School of Experience. He spent his career working for several powerful men, including Ludovico Sforza, Cesare Borgia, a few Medicis, and King Francis I of France. And of course, a ram merchant who wanted a portrait of his wife, Lisa Gherardini, aka Madonna Lisa or Mona Lisa. His career lasted roughly 50 years and he finished less than 20 paintings. Made commissions he never even starred because why do your job when you could look at birds or fish or cut open dead bodies? And so far, we got over 7,000 pages of notebooks. His student Francesco Melzi inherited the notes and spent years trying to organize them in some fashion. And he was gay. He was twice accused of sodomy with Jacopo Saltarelli in 1476. For fans of Assassin's Creed, that's the same year he met Ezio. The case was thrown out because no witnesses came forward, and also because one of the other men accused was Leonardo Tornabuoni, a member of a powerful family that married into the Medicis. There were a couple other men he may have had relations with, but by far the most famous is Gian Giacomo Caprotti da Oreno, better known as Salai. He's variously described as Leonardo's student or manservant. Nowadays, most people accept they were lovers. Leonardo gave him the nickname Salai, which means Little Devil or Little Unclean One, due to the fact he was constantly stealing and causing trouble. One entry from Leonardo's notebooks describes Salai as thief, liar, obstinate, greedy. But Leonardo seemed more amused than angry, and he also wrote, Salai, I want peace, not war. No more wars, I give in. A few people claim he was the model for Mona Lisa, but I don't think so. He was the model for St. John the Baptist and Bacchus, as well as the now lost Angel of the Annunciation and several random doodles. My favorite description of this relationship was from Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Da Vinci's Disappearance DLC, which reads, either this was true love or Sally had one hell of a sugar daddy. Isaac Newton. You probably know him for discovering gravity and his laws of motion, possibly as the inventor of calculus, although there was an argument about whether he or Leibniz deserves credit. He also studied light and used prisms to explain how rainbows work. He is the reason we have 7 colors in the rainbow. He picked 7 because he liked it. It's God's number. On his deathbed, he claimed he had never had sex with a woman, and based on everything else we know of his life, that is likely true. He never married or had a serious relationship with a woman. He even got angry at his friend Locke for trying to, quote, embroil him with women. This has led many people to say he died a virgin, which possible, but I think is missing the mark. Before I move on, I want to point out there is an increasingly popular theory he was asexual. While I don't personally believe that, it is a totally valid theory with a decent amount of evidence. I'm thinking he was gay because of Nicolas Fatio de Dwoller. That's a Dutch name, I'm not sure I said it correctly. Fatio was a Dutch mathematician. Newton was already well respected in his field when he met the rising star Fatio. They quickly became very close. Fatio's career basically came to a halt because he abandoned his own work to spend all his time with Newton. In their surviving correspondence, Fatio writes things like, "The reasons I should not marry will probably last all my life," and "I could wish, sir, to live all my life with you." As for Newton, he gave Fatio money and asked him to move into his rooms. Then, 4 years after me, their relationship came to an abrupt end with absolutely no contact for years. We have no clue why, but we do know Fatio left the country and ended up forming a close relationship with a different man, while Newton dealt with the breakup by having a nervous breakdown. This may have just been a very intense friendship, but when you take into account that neither of them married or showed any real interest in women, it's not totally ridiculous to suspect romance. It's also worth knowing that before Fatio, Newton lived with a man named John Wickens for 20 years, and like with Fatio, the two broke all contact when Wickens left. Next up, we have Julie d'Albany Bernois La Maupin. Please excuse my French. She's not very famous, but she is also the coolest person to ever live. She was a bisexual opera singer and fencer. She was born in 1673, or possibly 1670. Her father's job was to train court pages, and he also taught her both academic subjects and fencing. She ended up having an affair with her father's boss, the Count d'Arbagnac, who married her off and immediately sent her husband away. Her husband was Sieur de Maupin, hence her being called Madame de Maupin or La Maupin. Shortly after that, she ran off with another swordsman. They started making their way towards Paris, earning their way through fencing demonstrations and singing. Along the way, La Maupin fell in love with a merchant's daughter. The girl's father didn't approve and sent her to a nunnery to break them up. La Maupin joined the nunnery and helped the girl fake her death with the body of a recently deceased nun and a fire. The two escaped until La Maupin eventually got bored and took the girl back to her family. She eventually made it to Paris, where she joined the opera and received a pardon from the king for illegal dueling. She was 17 at this point. While at a ball, she flirted with a woman, which offended the men who were interested in that woman. She dueled them, won, and had to get another pardon because dueling was still illegal. She also went to Brussels for a bit until everyone calmed down. She eventually came back to France. Towards the end of her life, she got sick and spent her last days with her husband. She died at 33, or 36, depending on your source. Last up is Emily Dickinson. She is considered one of the most important American poets in history. She was the second of 3 children. Her family valued education, including for their girls, and she was lucky enough to live in a time when girls could go to schools and receive education. She attended Amherst Academy where she met Susan Huntington Gilbert, and it's pretty much accepted these days that she and Susan were in a romantic relationship. After Amherst Academy, she went to Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, now Mount Holyoke College, in 1847, but left after a year. We don't know why. Theories include her father wanted her to come home, or she was sick, she was homesick, or she disliked the religious fervor at the school. In the 1850s, she started to withdraw from society. In 1856, her friend Susan married her brother, William Austin Dickinson, usually referred to as Austin. In 1858, she started collecting her poems into manuscripts, and by the early 1860s, she had largely withdrawn from society completely. She wrote a lot at this time, but by the late 60s, her writing started to slow down. This is when her reputation as the Lady in White began. She rarely left the house. She sometimes even communicated through a door. When she was seen, she was dressed all in white. She died in 1886 at age 55. During her life, she only published 10 poems. However, after her death, her sister Lavinia discovered hundreds of unpublished poems, over 1,700. These poems ended up being split between Susan and Mabel Loomis Todd, Austin's mistress. Mabel published the first collection of Emily's poems. She edited them to remove the odd punctuation, and she also very much downplayed Emily and Susan's relationship. Officially, Susan was just Emily's sister-in-law. In actuality, pretty much everyone accepts they were in love. Her poem, One Sister Have I in the House, ends with the stanza, I split the dew, but took the morn. I chose the single star. From out the white night's numbers, sue forevermore. And that is all I have for today. I ended by asking if people had any questions, but obviously you can't really ask questions live on here, so I guess if you have any questions or thoughts, you can throw in the comments and I will hopefully remember to respond. Bye-bye.